Picture this, an 85-year-old warrior, his face etched by time but his eyes blazing like fire, lifts his sword and charges against giants who look like living mountains. The warriors of Israel watch, breath held, unable to believe it. Then before them all, the impossible unfolds. Those giants fall one by one, and Hebron, the dreaded fortress, becomes the inheritance of a single man. But behind this epic moment lies a deeper mystery. Who was Caleb? How could a slave from Egypt who walked for 40 years in the desert and buried thousands of his companions remain unshaken to the very end? What set him apart when everyone else lost their way? Was it just the courage of a stubborn heart? Was it a body that defied old age? Or was there a hidden promise, a secret covenant with God that sustained him until his final breath? Get ready, because in this story you will uncover the shocking truth about the man who refused to bow to fear, who challenged giants and achieved the impossible. Watch until the end and discover the eternal secret of the faith that kept Caleb standing when everyone else fell, a faith that can still change the course of your life today. Join us as we dive into one of the Bible's most inspiring stories, where Caleb, though born under the weight of slavery, dared to believe God's promises were greater than any giant. Walk with him from the chains of Egypt to the conquest of Hebron. This is the story of Caleb, of the tribe of Judah, Caleb son of Jephunneh. Before he was known as the warrior who would conquer Hebron, he was born among chains, shaped by suffering and hope. He was a descendant of the tribe of Judah, the lineage of kings and promises. His father, Jephunneh, was a man of steadfast heart, known for keeping his faith amid Egyptian idolatry. His mother, a woman of quiet courage, taught her children never to forget the promise made to Abraham, a land flowing with milk and honey. Caleb grew up with brothers and cousins, all accustomed to hard labor and the foreman's lash. Egypt, with its gold-covered palaces and heaven-defying temples, hid a brutal reality. Thousands of Hebrews crushed under forced labor. Men molded bricks from mud and straw, hauling stones under a scorching sun. Women groaned at the millstones, and children learned early to stay silent under the whip. Pharaoh was the absolute tyrant, considered a god in the flesh, seated on a golden throne and commanding armies that crushed all resistance. To him, Jacob's descendants were nothing but a dangerous mob to be controlled through slavery. The true antagonist of Caleb's youth was not just the man on the throne, but the slavery that ran through his people's veins. Injustice was a daily rhythm, fathers collapsing from exhaustion, mothers watching their children forced into heavy labor, the elderly dying without dignity. With each sunrise, a question echoed in Hebrew hearts: how long would the Lord allow such suffering? "Father, why are we treated this way?" Caleb asked, his eyes stinging, hands calloused. "Because we live in a land that is not ours," Jephunneh replied, his body weary but his voice firm. "But remember, my son, the God of Abraham has not abandoned us. He promised to free us." These words were the breath that sustained the boy. He grew up listening to the ancient stories, God's covenants with the patriarchs, and he dreamed of the day chains would no longer be part of life. Caleb's heart was shaped in the crucible of contrast, between the whip and the promise. It was in this season of despair that news spread like wildfire among the Hebrews. Moses had returned. This man, once a prince of Egypt and then a fugitive in the desert, now stood as the Lord's messenger. His words set hearts ablaze. "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go." For the first time in generations, hope swept through the streets of Goshen. Caleb, still young, heard the accounts of the plagues. The river turning to blood, frogs invading palaces, darkness swallowing the sun, and the death of Pharaoh's firstborn. He saw a new light in his neighbor's eyes, saw mothers smiling as they spoke of the impossible becoming real. The chains were still on their wrists, but their hearts were beginning to rise. The contrast was stark. On one side, Pharaoh hardened his heart, cloaked in absolute power, surrounded by riches and idols. On the other, an oppressed people rising not with swords, but with faith in the God who remembered his promise. And in the middle of it all, a boy from the tribe of Judah, Caleb, was growing up, learning to believe that the Lord's hand was stronger than the whip of any man. The announcement of deliverance was the emotional peak that ignited his youth. Moses raised his staff, and the sea parted before the crowd. Caleb ran between walls of water rising like ramparts, hearing shouts of joy, seeing chains fall to the ground. The impossible was happening before his eyes. The image was seared into his memory, weary bodies now standing tall in victory, eyes that had once been downcast, now shining in the moonlight, the certainty that Egypt was behind them. He was no longer just a freed slave. He was an heir to a promise that would walk with him into the days when he would become a warrior. Caleb was born at the precise moment God decided to act. His name would become synonymous with unshakable faith, but his beginning was marked by the crack of whips, the dust of bricks, and the cry of deliverance echoing at dawn. And as the sea closed over the Egyptians, Caleb knew the journey was just beginning. Freedom was not the end, but the start of a road where his faith would be tested to its limits. But freedom would also bring trials in the desert. The people had crossed the sea, leaving Egypt as a bitter memory. Yet their greatest challenge now lay ahead, the journey through the wilderness to the promised land. Each step under the blazing sun brought thirst, exhaustion, and grumbling. But there were also constant signs that the God who freed them was still guiding them. The cloud by day, the fire by night, the manna that fell each morning. Caleb walked among the multitude, no longer a helpless youth but a man carrying in his heart the hope of seeing Abraham's promise fulfilled. After long months, they reached the border of Canaan. It was the decisive moment. The Lord commanded that 12 men, one from each tribe, be sent to spy out the land. Among them were Caleb son of Jephunneh from Judah and Joshua son of Nun from Ephraim. Anticipation spread through the camp like fire in dry grass. "Caleb," Jephunneh said, gripping his son's hand, "this is the day your faith is tested. Don't just look at the walls or the giants. Look beyond. Look at the promise." "I will go, Father," Caleb replied, his eyes steady, "and I will return with the certainty that the Lord is stronger than all the armies of earth." For 40 days the spies traveled. They discovered fertile land, flowing rivers, orchards heavy with fruit, and wide fields. They saw Canaan as a paradise prepared by God, but they also saw walled cities like impenetrable fortresses, towering warriors, and organized armies. It was as if two worlds existed in the same territory, one of abundant promise, the other of overwhelming threat. The most striking proof they brought back was a single cluster of grapes so large it took 2 men to carry it on a pole. Children ran to see it, mothers wept with emotion, elders touched the fruit with trembling hands, remembering stories of the abundance promised to Abraham. "Look," exclaimed one of the spies, "the land truly flows with milk and honey." But soon voices divided. 10 of the spies raised voices of fear. "It's true, the land is good," they told the assembled people. "But the cities are fortified and enormous. We saw the descendants of Anak, men of great size. Next to them we seemed like grasshoppers. If we go in, we'll be devoured." A murmur grew in the crowd like a wave about to capsize a boat. Mothers hugged their children. Men trembled at the thought of impossible battles. Fear, always swift, spread faster than faith. Then Caleb stepped forward. His heart burned. His voice, once one among thousands, rose like a trumpet. "Silence," he shouted, raising his hands. "Listen to me, people of Israel. The land we pass through is exceedingly good. Do not look at the walls or the giants. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us in and give us that land. Let us not rebel or fear the people there, for they are our bread. Their protection is gone, and the Lord is with us." All eyes turned to him. On one side, 10 men pointed to giants. On the other, one man held faith high like a banner. There, the true line was drawn, eyes of fear against eyes of faith. The crowd saw 2 worlds in the same report. Joshua, moved by the same conviction, joined Caleb. "Yes, brothers, let us go up and take possession, for we can certainly overcome. The Lord who parted the sea will not abandon us now." But their words hit like fire against the wind. Most were overcome with panic. Some even picked up stones, threatening to silence the voices of faith. Caleb felt the weight of their contempt, but he did not back down. Within him, certainty was stronger than the crowd. The contrast was clear, two worlds before everyone. Some saw insurmountable walls, others saw doors opened by God. Some saw themselves as grasshoppers, others saw themselves as heirs to the promise. Caleb stood alone in his boldness, but he knew that one man full of faith was stronger than 1,000 trembling in fear. He raised his voice again, even amid the tumult. "We should go up and take possession, for we can certainly do it." The words hung in the air like a sword about to fall, leaving the entire camp divided between disbelief and a faith that defied the impossible. A heavy silence fell over the camp after Caleb's shout. The words "we can certainly do it" still echoed, but instead of inspiring courage, they fueled anger in hearts gripped by fear. Caleb watched silently as panic spread like a plague. Faces once lit by the memory of the giant grapes were now twisted in anguish. Mothers who had touched the fruit of Canaan now clutched their children as if doomed. Men dropped their makeshift spears in the dust, preferring the weight of surrender to the risk of battle. The internal conflict was overwhelming. The people began to murmur words Caleb never imagined he'd hear, a desire to return to Egypt. The whole camp seemed to sway between faith and cowardice. "If only we had died in Egypt," cried an old man, tears streaking his beard. "Or perished in this wilderness," added another, shaking his fists at the sky. "Why did you bring us here? To let our women and children become plunder," shouted a mother, pressing her son to her chest. "We should choose a leader and go back to Egypt." The words fell like daggers. Caleb clenched his fists, feeling the weight of disbelief. Each sentence rewound history, as if crossing the sea, the plagues, the manna in the desert were nothing but distant dreams. That night, collective weeping filled the camp, a deep, mournful sound of thousands of voices mixing with the cold night wind. Tents shook with sobs, wailing rose like a roar of despair. Caleb walked among the dead fires, seeing men lying in the dust, women tearing their hair, youths murmuring against Moses and Aaron. "Let's choose another leader and go back to Egypt," shouted a leader from Reuben. "Yes, enough of these promises that lead to death," replied another, inflaming the crowd. Caleb's heart burned. How could they choose slavery over freedom? How could they desire chains again instead of a land flowing with milk and honey? He looked at Joshua beside him and saw the same pain in his friend's eyes. "They are blind, Joshua," Caleb murmured. "They've forgotten the waters parting, the defeated Pharaoh, the manna that feeds us daily." "It's not forgetfulness, Caleb," Joshua replied, his voice firm yet heavy. "It's fear. Fear is a crueler enemy than any giant." As the wailing echoed, Moses and Aaron fell face down before the congregation, crying out for mercy. Instead of calming the people, this further inflamed their anger. They saw weakness where there was intercession, cowardice where there was humility. Caleb could bear it no longer. He tore his clothes in indignation and raised his voice above the tumult. "People of Israel, the land we passed through is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us in and give us that land. Do not fear these people, for their protection is gone." Joshua joined the cry, "The Lord is with us. Do not rebel against him. Do not fear the giants." But their words were like drops of water in the desert sand, swallowed by disbelief. The people, hearts hardened, could bear it no longer. Murmurs turned to shouts, shouts to threats. Men picked up stones, women clamored for a new leader. The enraged mob advanced against the faithful. Caleb took a deep breath, lifting his eyes to heaven. If the Lord did not intervene, faith would be crushed that night under the weight of the maddened crowd. And then, as the angry mob prepared to throw stones, a blazing light split the heavens. It was like liquid fire pouring over the tabernacle. The glory of the Lord appeared before them all, hovering like a flaming pillar over the tent of meeting. The noise ceased. Arms froze midair. Stones fell to the ground, shattering the silence of a people paralyzed by awe. The voice of the Most High thundered like rolling mountains. "How long will this people despise me? How long will they refuse to believe in me, despite all the signs I have performed among them? I will strike them with a plague and destroy them, and I will make you, Moses, into a nation greater and stronger than they." The declaration was like a sword through the heart of the nation. The threat was not mere discipline, it was total destruction. Caleb fell prostrate, face in his hands, tears wetting the desert sand. The warrior who feared neither walls nor giants trembled at the possibility of the Lord destroying his own people. Moses, overcome with fear and compassion, stepped toward the tabernacle. His voice, though trembling, rose in desperate plea. "Lord, if you destroy this people as one man, the nations will say you were unable to bring them into the land you promised. The Egyptians will say their God brought them out only to kill them in the wilderness. O Lord, I beg you, show that you are slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. Forgive these people, as you have forgiven them from Egypt until now." The entire camp held its breath. Children cried silently in their mother's arms. Men and women exchanged glances, awaiting the verdict. Some covered their ears, unable to bear the weight of the divine voice. The Lord's answer came like thunder and wind, firm and final. "I have forgiven them as you asked, but as surely as I live, none of those who despised me will see the promised land. Their bodies will fall in this wilderness. Each day they spied the land will become a year of wandering, 40 years until that generation is consumed." Collective weeping began again, no longer from fear of giants, but from the certainty of judgment. Cries of despair echoed among the tents. Parents wept for children who would grow up without entering the land. Children mourned for parents condemned to die in the sand. It was as if hope had been ripped from the nation's chest. And then in the middle of the sentence, a distinct promise shone like a ray of light. "But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit it." The words broke Caleb's heart. Still kneeling, he lifted his tear-stained face. He felt the weight of privilege, but also the pain of knowing his brothers, his fellow slaves, would not see the promise fulfilled. Joshua approached and gripped his shoulder. "The Lord has preserved us, Caleb. He will fulfill his word to us." Caleb, sobbing, replied, "What victory is there in entering the land if so many will fall before seeing its beauty? We will walk 40 years among graves, Joshua. 40 years listening to the wind whistle over the tombs of our brothers." The pillar of glory stood above the tabernacle, lighting the night like a sun in the darkness. Each beam reminded the people that God was there, present, just, merciful, yet unwavering against rebellion. Silence fell, broken only by the sobs of thousands grasping the gravity of the decree. Caleb remained on the ground for a long time. His body trembled, his chest heaved, but his eyes, though wet, shone with the conviction that the Lord would keep his promise. He would live to see Canaan. He would tread where his parents could not. But the price would be high, painful, marked by goodbyes and funerals in the heart of the desert. And as night enveloped the camp in heavy silence, broken only by the distant murmur of the wind, a secret burned in Caleb's heart. Dawn enveloped the camp in silence, but not a peaceful silence. It was a heavy silence laden with stifled murmurs and resentful glances. God's decree echoed like a hammer in every mind, 40 years in the wilderness until that generation perished. Many had spent the night in tears, others in fury, some in silent rebellion. Pride, wounded by judgment, began to morph into blind audacity. As the sun broke over the tents, a decision spread like wildfire. Men gathered makeshift spears, women wept, children watched in fear. A group stood with hardened faces. "We have sinned against the Lord," they declared firmly. "But now we will go up to the land he promised. We will not sit here and die in the desert. We will fight." Caleb listened, his heart heavy. He saw in their eyes not faith, but pride, the same pride that had rejected the promise, now trying to seize it by force. Moses came out of his tent and stood before the crowd, his voice strong yet pained. "Do not go up, Israel. The Lord is not with you. Do not be fooled, for you will be defeated by your enemies." But his words struck hardened hearts like hammers on stone. A leader from Ephraim retorted angrily, "To stay here is to die. If the Lord has promised, we will take the land with our own hands." A promise cannot be fulfilled without obedience, Moses replied, raising his staff. "You have rebelled against the Lord. You are not walking by faith but by pride." Caleb tried to step closer. "Brothers, listen," he cried. "The Lord told us to turn back, not to go up. If we march now, we march alone." But no one listened. Impassioned voices overlapped until the sound of improvised trumpets announced the march. The people advanced toward the hills, shouts of bravery mingling with gnashing teeth. Caleb stood back, watching dust rise under the feet of thousands. His heart twisted. He knew what would happen. There was no pillar of fire, no protective cloud, no presence of the Lord among them. It was merely flesh against flesh, men against prepared armies. And it didn't take long. From the mountaintops, the Amalekites and Canaanites descended like a flood. They launched arrows, brandished sharp swords, and raised war cries that echoed through the valley. The clash was brutal. The people of Israel, unprepared and without direction, were crushed. Caleb watched from afar as dust rose like a storm. Screams of pain, despair, and defeat reached the camp. Blood stained the ground. Men who had claimed strength in the morning now fell to enemy blades. Dust mixed with the metallic scent of blood. The desert, once silent, had become a scene of massacre. A young man from Issachar ran toward camp, his face covered in dust and blood. "Run, run," he shouted. "They're tearing us apart like cattle." Moses, standing before the tabernacle, closed his eyes in anguish. Aaron sobbed beside him. Joshua covered his face, unable to witness the tragedy. Caleb, however, did not look away. He needed to see, to feel every detail of that injustice. Human pride was reaping brothers, cousins, friends. The emotional climax peaked when survivors began to return, few in number, bloodied, dragging themselves among corpses left behind. Mothers ran to wounded children. Wives threw themselves over husbands' lifeless bodies. Children cried, not understanding why so many hadn't returned. Caleb fell to his knees, his face a mask of dust. His eyes burned not just from the sun, but from tears that refused to stop. With each body brought in, the pain multiplied. Some came to him still breathing, begging. "Caleb, why has the Lord abandoned us?" murmured a dying man, blood soaking his chest. "It was not the Lord who left us," Caleb replied, his voice breaking. "It was we who left him." By day's end, the ground was littered with corpses. The desert, once a place of tears, was now a fresh cemetery. The smell of death hung in the air, mingled with the wailing of women. Caleb helped carry bodies. With his own hands, he dug shallow graves in the burning dust. Each shovelful of sand weighed on his heart. When the last light died in a red sky, it seemed even the heavens wept. Joshua approached, placing a hand on his friend's shoulder. "We couldn't stop them, Caleb. They wouldn't listen." "I know, Joshua," he replied, gazing at the horizon. "But the pain is no less. Every grave we dig is a cry against the pride that blinded them." That night, amid graves and mourning, the faithful warrior understood the price of disobedience. The desert floor held not only Israel's dead, but the lessons of a generation that dared to face without God what could only be overcome with him. When heavy silence fell again, Caleb stood before the graves, hands stained with blood and dirt, eyes stinging with tears and dust. And in the heart of that man who still dreamed of the promised land, one thought echoed like an open wound. Caleb buries more brothers in the dust. The night silence swallowed the camp, leaving only the distant sound of wind sweeping sand. Fresh graves dotted the ground, and Caleb felt the weight of loss in every muscle. But the desert did not stop, and neither did life. The sun rose again over the tents, and the march continued. The Lord had decreed 40 years, and so it would be. The desert became a classroom, each day a lesson, each night a test of patience. And it was there Israel learned to depend on the unseen. Every morning, a different dew spread across the ground. When it evaporated, fine white grains like coriander seed remained. Children ran curiously, gathering it in small hands. "Father, what is this?" a boy asked, eyes wide. "It's the bread the Lord gives us," his mother replied, smiling though not fully understanding. "Let's call it manna." The people tasted it, and it was sweet like honey wafers. Bread from heaven fell daily, except on the Sabbath, when they remembered even rest came from God. This daily discovery shaped their faith. There were no barns, no harvest, no reserves, only the fresh miracle of each morning. Caleb, walking among the tents, watched as Israel's children grew up in the dust. Children born in Egypt now ran free across dunes, learning to live amid heat and sand. They grew up listening to stories told around campfires of the parted sea, the plagues, the promise. "Caleb, tell us again how the sea opened," a little girl asked, eyes shining. And he answered patiently, his voice deep and firm, repeating every detail as if for the first time. "The waters rose like walls, and we passed through on dry ground. The Lord fought for us, and Pharaoh was defeated." These children grew up knowing not the weight of chains, but the sound of promise. There were also days when thirst screamed louder than faith. The people grumbled, saying they would die parched under the sun. Then before them all, Moses struck the rock with his staff, and water gushed out in abundance. It ran clear between stones, forming streams in the middle of nowhere. The people drank, animals were satisfied, children played in the water. The visual proof was clear. Even in the desert, the Lord created life. As years piled up, Caleb became a teacher to the young men. He was no priest or prophet, but his practical faith made him an example. He gathered youths around the fire and said, "Learn to wait. It is not the strength of our arms or the haste of our feet that will take us to the promised land. It is the Lord's faithfulness. If he said we will see Canaan, we will see it. Until then, each day is practice, each morning a lesson." The young listened in silence. Some saw him as a father, others as a leader, all as a living testimony of unbreakable faith. While many grew old grumbling, Caleb aged with steadiness. His hair began to gray, wrinkles appeared, but his posture remained erect, his voice firm, his eyes as bright as in his youth. The champion's heart was forming within him, unshakable faith, even under the weight of years. Sometimes on clear nights, he went alone to the edge of camp. He lay on the sand, gazing at the starry sky stretched like a blanket over silent tents. In the constellations, he saw the memory of the promise to Abraham, "So shall your offspring be." The desert, silent and cold, bore witness to the patience of a man who never gave up. But time did not stand still. Each year, more bodies were buried in the dust. The rebellious generation slowly faded. Friend after friend, brother after brother, all fell. Caleb helped carry bodies, comfort widows, instruct orphans. The desert was both cemetery and school. Amid so much loss, he remained strong, confident, like a tree planted in dry soil, supported by invisible roots. As wind whistled through dunes and the camp slept, one phrase echoed within him like a silent promise no one else seemed to hold. Everyone fell, but he remained standing. The day dawned gray, and even the sky seemed unwilling to offer comfort. Wind blowing between tents carried the scent of ancient dust mixed with the salt of tears. Caleb rose before the first birdsong, ran his hand over the rough fabric of his tent, and left slowly so as not to wake those still seeking rest in their memories. There was no rest, only silence, the kind that weighs on the skin like oven ash and graves, so many graves. Dunes bore fresh marks from shovels and the cracked soles of those who dug to exhaustion. In the distance, a group of youths carried a makeshift stretcher of logs and rope. The body atop was covered by a simple cloth. Behind them, a girl held the cloth's edge, walking with short steps as if each grain of sand were an insurmountable obstacle. Caleb stopped, planted his feet, and waited for the small procession to pass. The child looked up and whispered, "Uncle Caleb, will my father wake up?" He took a deep breath as if unearthing a word that wouldn't hurt and knelt to her level. "He sleeps in the Lord, little one. The desert is just the corridor. Home is still ahead." "But it hurts so much," the girl replied, touching his face. "It hurts because we love," Caleb said, wiping his own eye without realizing. "And because remembering is heavier than carrying water." The youths moved on. Caleb watched until they disappeared among tents. There was the silent observation. Children burying parents, boys with shovels in hand, girls learning too soon to kneel beside cool sand. That generation that left Egypt dwindled day by day, and the desert slowly transformed into the vast cemetery God had decreed. At first, some resisted, as if negotiating with their own age. Then they accepted. There was less shouting, less rebellion. Joshua approached carrying 2 jars of water and handed one to Caleb. "They're taking 5 more today," he murmured, looking at the line of graves stretching like a scar across the ground. "Tomorrow there will be 4, Caleb replied. "And in the Lord's time, none of the old generation will be left." He took a sip, letting water run down his beard. "And then we'll start over." "Sometimes I wonder if the young will understand," Joshua said. "They grow up seeing shovels, not swords, funeral marches, not victories. What will sustain them when we cross the Jordan?" "The same thing that sustains us now," Caleb replied firmly. "The Word. It's not what we've seen that guides us, but what we've heard from the Lord. Teach them to listen. I will teach them to wait." As afternoon faded and the sun burned low, Caleb gathered some young men in the shade of a rock. They were sons of men he had helped bury, hair tanned by the sun, hands scarred by stretcher ropes, eyes trying to look bigger than their tears. He waited, then spoke. "Your fathers walked this far, and their footsteps are the foundation of ours. We will not despise their memory. We will honor it with obedience. The desert school does not approve those who trust. It reproves those who harden their hearts." He paused. "If the Lord says walk, we walk. If he says wait, we wait." One boy, tall and thin, spoke hoarsely. "Waiting hurts. My mother says time fixes everything, but time only digs more graves." "Time alone is a knife," Caleb replied. "In God's hands, time is a loom. He is weaving something we cannot yet see. You will learn to walk without haste and to believe without shortcuts." In the early hours, when camp was quiet, Caleb made his rounds. He passed tents as if reading a long letter, recognizing names, remembering struggles. In some, tired coughs could be heard. In others, the silence was new, like that day's graves. He spoke to God without voice, with footsteps, with sighs. Sometimes he knelt beside a stone and whispered, "Do not let them go without their testimony living on in their children." Yet there was a struggle no one saw, Caleb's own internal conflict. Faced with so much death, hope could have withered. Faced with a calendar that seemed to mock promises, faith could have become empty routine. He felt the pain, and the pain had names: friends, neighbors, companions. And at the same time, he felt a perseverance not his own, like an underground stream feeding an invisible root. "How are you, friend?" Joshua asked one morning, noticing tiredness in his eyes. "Tired of so many goodbyes," Caleb admitted, "but firm. I feel my bones learning the language of promise. They remember every word and respond when the wind passes." "Your bones will sing on the day of inheritance," Joshua said, half smiling, half weeping, "and I will sing with you." On some days, long lines of small companions followed behind stretchers. Boys carried shovels larger than their arms. One complained, panting, "It's too heavy." Caleb took the shovel, walked a few steps, and returned it. "It's heavy, yes, but you won't carry it forever. Learn now not to run away. Those who run from pain miss the lesson that prepares for joy." So the days passed, and the desert, which began as a sentence, became discipline. Loss shaped character. Waiting expanded the heart's capacity. Not all tears fell from despair. Many were water watering the seed of deeper trust. Caleb, now gray-haired, walked with a sure step. There was a serenity about him that didn't deny pain but transcended it. One afternoon, a group arrived with another body. The youth carrying it, covered in sand, knelt before the open grave and murmured, "Father, we will arrive. I promise." Raising his face to Caleb, he said, "Teach me not to doubt when the dust rises." "Put your eyes where the dust can't reach," Caleb advised. "Read the stars and remember who lit them." As the last light faded, songs began, not triumphant but steadfast. They spoke of a God who leads on unlikely paths, who keeps bread on the ground and water in stones, who does not forget the work of his hands. Some wept, others smiled. Almost all sang softly, as if harboring a fire in their hearts for dawn. The next morning, the young men returned with shovels. There were fewer graves to dig. The count was nearing its end. Caleb looked at Joshua, and both understood without words. The cloud was moving not just in the sky, but in history. The desert would remain a school for their children, but for them, the trained teachers, it was the bell of the final day. Still, there was a farewell to say. They gathered around the grave of one of the last elders, a man who, though condemned to die in the sand, had lived his final years with meekness. Caleb bent, picked up a handful of sand, and said with a choked voice, "Thank you for teaching us to fear God and love His word. We walk in your footsteps, but our feet will carry your counsel forward." The assembly responded with a low "Amen," and hands opened. Sand fell in a long, short shower, covering the old man's cloak. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was pregnant. And there, between tents still breathing stories and caves holding secrets, time seemed to hold its breath before releasing a new breath over the congregation. When the last shovelful of sand fell, a new time began. The morning wind brought a different freshness. The desert lay behind like a long shadow, and ahead the Jordan roared in its flood. The new generation, children of those who fell in the sand, now stood before the promised frontier. Young eyes shone, hearts raced, hands sweated on makeshift spears. And among them stood Caleb, firm, hair gray and face etched by age, but with the same burning faith he'd carried since youth. Silence fell over the crowd. Moses was no longer among them. The leader was now Joshua, Caleb's companion since the days when they dared to believe while everyone else murmured. Joshua raised his voice before the congregation. "Today the Lord will do wonders among you. The Ark of the Covenant will go before you, and when the priest's feet touch the water, the Jordan will part before the presence of the living God." The people murmured uneasily. Some stared at the turbulent waters, wondering how they'd cross without boats or bridges, with children, flocks, and tents. Caleb watched silently. His heart remembered the Red Sea, the day he passed through walls of water. Now, decades later, his feet again stood before impossible waters. The priests approached, carrying the golden ark on their shoulders. Sunlight reflected off it as if it were engulfed in fire. The people made way. Each step of the Levites was a drumbeat in Israel's heart. And then came the twist. As the soles of the priests' feet touched the riverbank, the swiftly flowing Jordan suddenly stopped. A roar echoed as if the river choked, the current ceasing. Waters rose in a distant column, leaving the bed dry before them. A clamor erupted. Children laughed, women wept, men cried in amazement. It was as if time had turned back, repeating the miracle of old. But this wasn't the parents, it was the children. Those who fell in the wilderness hadn't seen Canaan, but their descendants now received what unbelief had stolen. Divine justice was being fulfilled, children receiving what their parents lost. Joshua raised his hand, his voice echoing, "Come across, the Lord has opened the way, come across and take possession of what he promised." The people began to cross, sandals treading the dry riverbed once filled with water. Caleb followed, each step pulsed with emotion. His feet felt firm on the earth moistened by miracle. His heart burned. He was finally entering Canaan, not as an impetuous youth, but as a mature man. He was a living witness that the Lord's word never fails. As they crossed, Joshua gave an order. "Choose 12 men, one from each tribe. Each carry a stone from the middle of the Jordan from where the priests stand. We will set these stones as a testimony for all generations. When your children ask, 'What do these stones mean?' you shall say, 'The waters of the Jordan stopped before the Ark of the Covenant, and the Lord opened a way.'" Caleb went to the river's middle, picked up a stone with strong hands and carried it on his shoulder. It wasn't just a rock, it was a living memory, a symbol of perseverance. On the other side, he helped stack it with others, forming an altar that would forever demonstrate God's faithfulness across generations. As the last family crossed and the priests climbed from the riverbed, the waters began to flow again, roaring with force. The people, now in Canaan, looked back and saw the Jordan swollen, uncrossable. There was no turning back. The crossing was a milestone, a seal. They were in the promised land. Caleb took a deep breath, knelt, and touched the ground. His hands trembled as he felt the damp earth. He whispered in prayer, "Lord, I have kept this faith for 45 years. My feet now touch the fulfillment of your promise." Tears streamed down his face, not of sadness, but of silent victory. All he had endured, the lash of Egypt, the weeping of the desert, endless funerals, culminated in this moment. His reward was finally before him. But as the people celebrated and children ran among standing stones, a challenge loomed. In the distance, the walls of an imposing city cut the horizon, tall towers, iron gates, walls that seemed to touch heaven. Jericho stood like a stone giant blocking Israel's future. And so, while celebration still echoed across newly conquered plains, a shadow of battle hung over everyone. Stone walls rose to block the future. The roar of Jordan's waters still seemed to echo behind, but ahead rose the city Canaanites called Invincible, Jericho. Its walls appeared to rise from the ground itself, wide enough for chariots, high enough to shade anyone approaching. In the field, dust settled slowly, as if time itself held its breath. Joshua walked among the ranks. His command came not in fiery speeches, but in silence. The order had already been given by the Lord. Obedience would be the standard. "Let no one speak," he murmured soberly as he passed Caleb. "Today our voice is the sound of trumpets and the step of obedience." Caleb inclined his head. His eyes lingered on ancient stones, insolent closed gates, centuries of scornful laughter. The antagonist had a face and bricks. From above, Canaanites pointed and mocked a people marching without raised swords, battering rams or ladders. Injustice was as ancient as pride. They mocked faith as if it were weakness, as if trust equaled surrender. "Look at us," a guard shouted, his voice booming over the wall. "Weary shepherds, old men and children. When you tire of wandering, we'll collect your bones." Caleb didn't answer. The memory of the desert settled over him like a cloak. Years of dust and funerals, bread from heaven and water from rock, all converging on that day. Joshua's silence was a figure of power. In the absence of shouts, the command was clearer, as if each step inscribed a prayer on the earth. The priests took their places. The ark rested on their shoulders, gold glowing in morning sun. Beside them, 7 Levites raised rams' horn trumpets. The procession moved. First the ark, then the men of war, the people behind like a disciplined river. Dust rose fine, marking the path around the city. A circle of silence began to form around Jericho's pride. 7 days, Joshua murmured to Caleb without raising his voice. And on the last day, 7 laps. At the right time, the shout. "The shout does not come from the chest," Caleb replied, looking ahead. "It comes from the promise." The first day was all marching, measured steps, trumpets piercing air with long notes like invisible lines cutting through pride. From above, Canaanites continued to jeer. "Tired," an archer mocked, shaking his bow. "Afraid to get your hands dirty." On the second day, they repeated. On the third, too. Each morning began the same. Each afternoon ended with dust settling and gates intact. There were those inside who wanted to hurry, those outside who wanted to prove a point. But Joshua maintained his command, silence and trumpets. In camp at night, mothers soothed children with old stories. Young men sharpened spears they might never use. Caleb sat by the fire, answering with few words. "Are the walls going to fall?" a boy asked, eyes shining. "Yes," said Caleb, "not because we pushed, but because we obeyed." On the 6th day, the dust of the journey clung to his skin like salt. Sun beat down. Laughter from walls seemed louder. Still, no one backed down. Caleb felt his age in his knees, but also an ancient youth burning in his chest, as if all the years of waiting converged into a single heartbeat. The 7th day arrived. Dawn brought a cold wind and camp stirred before dew fell. Joshua passed again, hand steady, gaze clear, his silence worth more than any harangue. At the signal, the procession formed, priests leading, ark behind, people next, the city around them like a challenge. 1 lap, 2, 3, 4. Each trumpet blast a feather, scratching the sentence in the sky. 5, 6. And on the 7th lap, the world seemed to lean in to listen. "Today, Caleb," whispered Joshua, barely moving his lips. "It is not the man who shouts. It is faith that shouts," Caleb answered. "And faith removes mountains." The seventh circuit closed. Joshua raised his arm. The silence, which for days had been embers, became an explosion. The priests blew trumpets, sound breaking like a storm in a narrow valley, multiplying in echoes. Then the command, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." The cry rose as if the earth itself opened its mouth. It was joy, clamor, the memory of the parted sea and the desert that formed them. Trumpets split the air, dust rose in whirlwinds. Warriors raised hands, children too. Old men who had seen Egypt felt youth return for an instant. The walls shook. First a low groan like old wood, then a crack too, 1,000. Stones began to give way. Fittings crumbled. Pride lost its mortar. Towers wavered, gates creaked like wounded beasts. In a few breaths, the invincible turned to dust. What had been an insult became ruin. The emotional peak came like an avalanche. Walls fell. Wind swept the field with sand and debris. Canaanites who had mocked cried out in terror, steps lost among cascades of stone. The invincible city discovered no iron could stop the decree of the Most High. Caleb advanced not as a plunderer but as a witness. Every stone on the ground was a verse fulfilled, every cloud of dust, an amen from God to his people. "See, boy," he said to a youth nearby, voice still choked. "It's not muscle or blade, it's presence. It is the Lord." "Yes," the boy replied, eyes wet. Trumpets continued. Victory shouts rose like fire. Dust clung to sweat, forming trails on Israelite faces. In every line was the etching of many years. Joshua at the center remained the figure of power, leading in silence, collecting glory and returning it to the only one who deserves it. At night, when dust finally settled, lamps rose among rubble. Camp sang softly, ancient songs of outstretched arms and promises kept. Caleb sat on a fallen stone, running his hand over the rough surface, as if reading with his fingertips the phrase heaven had written on the wall. "No pride endures before the Lord." He looked up at constellations, the same Abraham had counted, and sighed. "If stones fall at the sound of trumpets," he said to himself, "what will the Lord do when we face the giants?" At the field's edge, wind picked up again, playing with dust like a child discovering a toy. Somewhere a final block loosened and fell with a belated crash, reminding everyone that victory, though certain, comes at God's pace. Caleb stood, clenched his fist, and his heart responded with the calm of one who has seen the impossible twice. Around ruins, tribal leaders gathered fragments of that day. Some kept them in their bosoms like seed. "Remember," said Joshua, "waiting is also war." The people responded with an amen that quieted the camp. Caleb smiled. Dust in his beard tasted of promise, hope smelled of the future. The wind hushed. If stones fall, what will become of the giants? Jericho's walls still lay in ruins. Echoes of victory shouts had barely faded when pride began to stir among the people. After seeing the invincible city fall without a sword, many believed no force could withstand Israel. Hearts swelled with confidence, but not with faith. And soon before them stood the small city of Ai, nestled among modest hills, guarded by few men. To weary warriors, it seemed a simple, negligible task. Joshua sent spies to scout. Their return further inflamed empty confidence. "We don't need everyone," they said assuredly. 2,000 or 3,000 men are enough to take it. Let's not tire the whole people. It's small, fragile. It's not Jericho." Caleb, hearing the report, frowned. His years of wandering taught him to be wary of pride masquerading as faith. He approached a leader. "No battle is small when the Lord is not at the forefront. Remember, it wasn't our strength that brought down Jericho, but God's presence." The words were ignored. The army left with foolish confidence, leaving the crowd watching from camp. Women waved, children smiled, certain fathers and brothers would return victorious. But afternoon brought a bitter wind. From the hills, fleeing warriors emerged, blood running down arms and legs, spears abandoned along the path. Faces once brave were now pale with terror. What should have been triumph became disaster. 36 Israelites lay dead. Survivors, wounded and humiliated, ran back to a city barely defended. Camp filled with screams. Women wept, hugging orphaned children. Young men stared at battered warriors. Elders covered their heads with dust. The people who had celebrated now fell silent in shame. The discovery was clear. Israel had been defeated by the few. Joshua tore his clothes and fell face down before the ark. He lay in dust until evening, crying out, "Ah, Lord God, why did you bring us across the Jordan to hand us over to the Amorites? Who will rescue us now? The Canaanites will hear and surround us, and your great name will be blotted out." Joshua's prostrate testimony was like an arrow to the people's hearts. Even the hardest sensed something serious was hidden. Caleb, seeing the leader on the ground, knelt beside him. "Joshua, our God does not lose battles. If we have been defeated, there is sin in the camp. It's time to seek not victory, but holiness." That night the Lord spoke to Joshua in a voice of fire. "Arise, Israel has sinned. They have taken what was devoted to destruction, stolen, lied, hidden it among their possessions. Therefore, they cannot stand against their enemies until you remove the curse from among you." The truth fell like a stone. One man, Achan, had taken what the Lord forbade, hiding gold and cloaks in his tent. Because of one man, the whole nation fell. It was visual proof. Holiness wasn't a detail. It was the key to every victory. Caleb gathered his tribe that night. Many were discouraged, some angry, some fearful. He walked among them, looking each in the face until stopping before the youngest. "Do not give in to shame," he said firmly. "Remember Jericho. It wasn't sword or wall, but the Lord's holiness that made us triumph. Today we learned one man's sin hurts all, but we also learned each one's obedience strengthens the nation. If we want to conquer Canaan, we must first conquer our hearts." Men bowed their heads, touched by Caleb's steadfastness. Women breathed deeply, as if tears would water hope. Even the youngest felt challenged to live not just as warriors, but as saints before the Lord. The next day, Achan was exposed before the people. Confession came in tears, and the Lord's justice fell heavily. The scene marked Israel with an eternal scar. Hidden sin of one could ruin thousands. Everyone understood no spear, army, or strategy was stronger than holiness. When purification was complete, Joshua stood before the congregation again, eyes still red but heart firmer. "The Lord is holy. If we walk in his ways, Canaan will be ours. If we despise his commands, Ai will not be the only defeat." Caleb remained standing, hands steady, eyes fixed on the land still awaiting them. He knew this shame would be remembered as a lesson, not an end. The champion's heart formed before everyone. Not the sword guaranteed victory, but holiness. That night, amid the weight of shame and justice, Caleb lay awake, watching stars illuminate tents in silence. In his heart, a question burned like hot iron, still without clear answer. Camp awoke without song. Eyes shame hung like mist ingrained in skin and spirit. Spears lay silent, eyes averted. Joshua, face still marked by previous days' dust, summoned tribes before the ark. Caleb stood a few steps behind, hands clenched, breath held. He watched silently, as if knowing that before the sword comes the light that reveals. "Sanctify yourselves," Joshua had commanded the night before, his voice heavy. "For tomorrow the Lord will reveal what is hidden among us." Now, before all eyes, the process began. Tribes passed one by one, heavy as stone columns under glory's gaze. Caleb's heart pounded in time with their steps. When divine lot fell on Judah, a murmur cut through the crowd. It was his tribe. Pain descended like a blade. Caleb took a deep breath, not to defend himself, but to remain standing. "Judah," Joshua announced solemnly, "come forward." The families of Judah filed past. The weight of choice pressed on each man's chest. The Lord's hand descended again. The clan of Zerah was separated. Another selection, Zabdi, then Carmi. With each name the circle tightened. Silence grew thicker. Finally, before them all, one man stood. Achan, eyes downcast, shoulders tense, dust on ground seeming to call him. Joshua approached with firmness and gentleness. "My son, give glory to the Lord, the God of Israel. Tell me please what you have done. Do not hide it." Achan swallowed, throat burning. For a moment he tried to lift his head, but guilt weighed him down. "I saw," his voice trailed off. "I saw a beautiful Babylonian robe, 200 shekels of silver, a bar of gold weighing 50 shekels. I coveted them. I took them. They are hidden in the ground inside my tent with the silver underneath." A collective sigh swept camp. Sin had a body and a cipher, a mark and a hiding place. Joshua sent messengers who ran like arrows. Caleb, motionless, watched. His silence was both prayer and wound. Soon men returned carrying the robe, silver and gold. Metal gleamed under sun, burning like mockery. There was the proof. In the dust, greed had planted its tent. "Israel fell because of this," whispered an elder, clutching his cloak as if afraid of contamination. "Not by Ai's power," said another bitterly, "but by weakness of heart." Caleb closed his eyes. Internal conflict throbbed. He knew the weight of justice and the taste of mercy. He knew the Lord's holiness is not negotiable, that one man's sin could wound a nation. Still, it hurt. It hurt because that man had a face, a history, a family. It hurt because he was Judah. The order was given. The whole people proceeded to the valley of Achor, the valley of trouble. The procession descended under a cloudless sun, silence broken only by creaking ropes and scuffling sandals on gravel. Achan was taken with all he owned, objects, tent, animals. Nothing would remain as a reminder of a heart that chose the hidden over the holy. "May the Lord purify us," Joshua murmured, raising hands. "May he give us an undivided heart," Caleb added, voice low, face hard with determination and tears. Stones began to fly. There were no cries of vengeance, only the gravity of just sentence. The people knew they were not punishing an enemy, but removing a tumor from their own body. When the rock pile rose high, they brought fire. Flames licked what remained: tent, robe, ropes, material memories, and the pride that guarded them. Crackling spread through the valley like a harsh psalm. The emotional trigger sank into everyone, fire consuming all of Achan. Caleb remained motionless for long moments, eyes fixed on flames. Within him, two currents clashed, compassion and obedience. Both came from God, and at that moment they met at a painful, sacred point. "Lord," he whispered almost soundlessly, "do not let us forget the promise is protected by holiness." Beside him, a young man from Judah trembled. "Uncle Caleb, what if I fall like him?" "He who keeps his heart with the God who sees will not fall," Caleb replied, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Sin grows in secret. Obedience grows in the light. Walk in the light." The flames subsided, leaving a pile of rocks and ash. Joshua raised his voice, not to humiliate, but to remember. "This heap will tell our children, the Lord does not accept what is stolen, nor honor what is hidden." Here wrath ended. Here the covenant begins anew. The people breathed in unison as if something heavy lifted. Air in the valley grew lighter. It still hurt, but pain mixed with insight. Some knelt, others raised hands, many wept. Ai's shame now had a name, an explanation, and hope, a path and order. On the way back to camp, Caleb walked slowly, each stone along the path reminding him of another stone, the one once rolled before Abraham, the stone of promise. Young men followed in silence. Finally, one asked, "Are you still going with us?" "Yes," Caleb said without hesitation. "Discipline is not abandonment, it is care. He corrects us because he has not given up on us." As evening fell, Joshua summoned the chiefs. In the circle of leaders, firelight cast tall shadows on each man's face. "The war is not over," Joshua said. "Ai will not be remembered as our tomb, but as our lesson. Tomorrow we'll hear the Lord's strategy. Today we keep the lesson." "Holiness is not a form of worship," Caleb added. "It is the nation's armor. Without it, small arrows wound us. With it, walls fall." "And Hebron," someone ventured, recalling the burning question among tribes. Caleb stared into night as if reading an invisible inscription. "Hebron waits for a whole heart. When the time comes, we will not only take it, we will consecrate its altars to the living God." Voices quieted. Clear skies seemed to reopen the firmament over Israel. Moon rose slowly, casting silver over tents. Mothers held children close. Fathers sharpened not only weapons but character. The valley of Achor was behind them, but its memorial burned fresh like a coal beneath ash. Caleb lay down but didn't sleep immediately. Fire crackled low, resembling the valley's fire now transmuted into vigilance in his heart. He closed his eyes and saw Jordan opening, Jericho crumbling, Ai teaching, a clear path appearing ahead like a streak of dawn over dark hills. Weariness finally arrived, and with it a peace coming not from victories but from alignment. Before sleep overtook him, Joshua passed the tent entrance. "Tomorrow," he said, "the Lord will tell us how to take Ai." "Tomorrow," answered Caleb, "and the day after and until the end, let him first tell us how to remain holy." The night, which began heavy, ended lightly. Between dew and tents, boys memorized the valley's history. Young women learned a new song of holiness. Old men nodded, remembering how many paths are lost by a small detour. Israel's camp rested not in restored pride, but in rekindled reverence. As dawn touched the world's edge, a gentle wind swept through ranks, swaying pennants, opening tiny cracks in dust for the bud of a new day. The valley's ashes were not an end. They were fertilizer. The God who burns what corrupts is the same who kindles what sustains. Caleb stood, looked east, and with hand on chest answered heaven's silent call. Now the path was clear for greater achievements. Dawn broke over Gilgal with the taste of iron and promise. Messengers arrived breathless. Amorite kings were descending on Gibeon because of its alliance. Joshua, without hesitation, summoned leaders. The assembly formed like a blade. Caleb, now mature and attentive, adjusted his armor and listened for God's breath among tents. There was haste, but it was obedient haste. They would march by night, climbing slope after slope, surprising the enemy before fear's shadow grew. "We will not fight alone today," Joshua said, voice low and firm. "The Lord told us, 'Do not fear them, for I have delivered them into your hands.'" Caleb nodded. He remembered Achor's stones, the glow of newly kindled holiness. The lesson was fresh: without purity, defeat; with obedience, an open path. Warriors closed ranks. Levites guarded the ark like fire in the people's hearts. The collective step became prayer. They climbed slopes at night without torches to betray their march. Cold wind bit skin, but the column advanced as if darkness itself opened a path. At first trace of light, the valley revealed armies like swarms, Amorite spears flashing, banners raised in outrage, horsemen pounding hooves. Their contempt was ancient. Shouts called Israel a flock without walls. Joshua raised his arm and silence answered. The trumpet sounded a long note. Then, like an arrow, Israel's vanguard entered the enemy camp's flesh. The shock was sudden. Caleb ran alongside young men he had trained in the desert school. The Amorites' front ranks shattered like pottery. Surprise finally changed sides. Yet they were numerous, coming from all flanks, pushing up hills, seeking to envelop the rear guard. Joshua saw them maneuver and gave orders like lightning. Tribes adjusted positions. The siege shell became a spear, opening an avenue through which faith advanced. Then came the twist. From heaven, God hurled stones, not boulders, but hammers from the Almighty. Immense hailstones pounded ground, crushing chariots, bending shields, tearing standards. Noise split air like a raging sea. Amid tumult, Israelites remained unharmed by the storm that distinguished friend from foe. Caleb dodged a falling horse and watched as an Amorite general covered himself before being struck down by a block of ice. Warriors looked on astonished, unable to explain with reason what faith already knew. "The Lord fights," shouted a young man from Judah. "Hold the line," Caleb shouted. "Whoever breaks formation loses victory's harvest." The Amorites wavered. Some dropped weapons, others tried to flee toward Beit Horon. But descent became a trap. Mud, rocks, fear, and hail turned flight into fall. Justice was not Israel's, it was the Lord. More fell by heaven's stones than by sword's edge. Still, the day seemed too short for such decisiveness. Shadows crept up slopes like an invisible enemy, and victory required hours. Joshua stopped, took a deep breath like one drinking fire, and looked up. There was thick silence, the entire field suspended between two heartbeats. Then his voice pierced hills and valleys. Sun, stand still over Gibon. Moon, stand still over the valley of Ajalon. The impossible bowed. The sun stood still, motionless like a sentinel posted by God. The moon waited as witness. The emotional trigger struck everyone with awe. Warriors lifted faces, eyes burning with sweat and dust, and saw the sky obey. The visual peak was etched forever. Spears pointed, mouths half open, bodies mid-run, and above them fire suspended. "He heard," whispered Caleb, tears mixing with dust. "He heard faith." The battle resumed with the calm of those who have already touched the impossible. Israel pressed without blind ferocity, but with precision. The order: close the breach, prevent kings from escaping, cut off arrogance's path. When an Amorite tried to react, light itself betrayed him. There was no night to hide his steps. Caleb led a platoon to rocks where kings had taken refuge. They found the cave, sealed it with stones, and returned to the field, for victory is not sealed until complete. Hours multiplied as if the Lord stretched time's fabric. The sun in endless noontime dried mud, firmed ground for passage, fired the faithful spirit. The moon, standing still, reminded fugitives every hiding place has an end. In persecution's wake, cities shattered their pride. Lands began to change hands, the promised reward. The map previously covered in foreign names received the seal of God's faithfulness. In the end, Joshua ordered the 5 kings brought before the people. Caleb watched without triumph as leaders and soldiers placed feet on necks, not for men's glory, but so Israel's heart might learn where strength comes from. The speech was simple as a blade. Do not be afraid or discouraged. Be strong and courageous, for this is what the Lord will do to all your enemies. The night that never arrived was followed by rest that finally came. The sun resumed its race when justice was served. The moon resumed its dance when the lesson was written in sky. Fires lit between tents, over embers bread and lambs roasted. Silent warriors chewed slowly, replaying in memory stones descending from above. Still light, sin conquered and courage rewarded. Caleb sat at camp's edge, knees clasped, gazing at the horizon back to normal rhythm. A young man stood shyly beside him. "Is it true time obeyed?" "Time obeys the one who made time," Caleb replied. "We obeyed the Lord, and time obeyed us because of him. So nothing can stop the promise." Caleb took a while to answer, then smiled gravely. "Only our own heart. As long as we keep it whole, nothing will fail." Wind blew lightly, banners murmured like trees in prayer. In distance, sentries exchanged passwords, camp whispered gratitude. In Joshua's tent, maps were spread, ropes marked lines, city names lost threatening hue. Conquered lands were more than soil. They were a reminder God walks with his people when they walk with him. Before bed, Caleb walked to the stone marker boys had stacked to commemorate the day. He touched one, felt the chill of fallen night, and said softly, "There are still giants. There are still hills. There are still doors. But there is also the hand that stops the sun." He raised eyes to starry sky, and his heart responded with a short psalm made of dust and hope. Then he returned to tent, lay down, and let sleep cover battle's memory with peace like a cloak. As he closed eyes, however, a question throbbed sharp as a promise and a call. If even the sun stood still, could the promise fail? The day after the sun stood still began with strange silence, as if even wind feared to disturb camp. Warriors awoke still astonished, repeating to one another the miracle they witnessed. But Joshua gave no time for long contemplation. The map of the promised land was still covered in enemy names. Victory would only consolidate when the people's hearts learned faith is nourished not by past memories, but by present obedience. "Prepare yourselves," he commanded, voice firm as steel. "Today we will see the downfall of kings who mock the living God." Caleb stood behind the commander, watching Joshua's steady gaze. No arrogance, only firmness. He knew he commanded not just warriors, but a nation shaped by desert. Now Israel marched against 5 coalition kings, Kings who exploited the weak, sold entire peoples like cattle, built altars to stone gods. Their banners were painted with arrogance, spears still dripped innocent blood. Injustice cried from ground, God's justice responded. At a cave's mouth, 5 kings lay hidden, cowering in defeat, pride covered in dust. Men of Judah sealed the entrance with large stones until Joshua arrived. The whole camp gathered. The place seemed to tremble like a judgment hall. Joshua raised his voice. "Bring the kings out of the cave. Today you will see what the Lord will do to all your enemies." When they were brought, people murmured. Crowns fell, tunics torn, eyes once inflamed, now empty of hope. Caleb felt the scene's weight. For years he watched brothers die in desert, waiting for this moment. Now 5 kings lay prostrate before Israel's God. Joshua called each tribe's leaders. "Come close, place your feet on these men's necks." Leaders hesitated a moment, then obeyed. It was a gesture not of gratuitous humiliation, but of instruction. The entire army watched as Joshua proclaimed, "This is what the Lord will do to all your enemies against whom you fight. Do not be afraid, be strong." The answering cry echoed like thunder. "Amen!" Israel's heart burned. It was not human triumph, but divine confirmation. Caleb, standing beside his tribe, stood firm, eyes fixed on young warriors holding spears still stained with hail and blood. He knew they would never forget the sight, kings who seemed like gods, reduced to dust. The execution was swift. Joshua gave the order. Swords fell upon kings. Their bodies were hung from trees as a testament. At dusk they were buried back in the cave where they tried to hide, covered by the same stones that imprisoned them. It was the end of a coalition, the end of pride that for years crushed the poor. Then Joshua raised his hand. "Burn the enemy's standards." Flames rose to sky, consuming banners embroidered with false god symbols. The flames danced. People watched in reverent silence. It was more than fire, a reminder no human power endures in the Lord's presence. Wind carried ashes away, spreading the bitter smell of burned pride across countryside. The emotional peak reached every heart. Warriors who once feared now raised fists in victory. Women and children watching from hills burst into tears seeing the promise advance. People who exploited the weak were now a memory. Israel free continued as a living witness. Caleb walked among Judah's soldiers, stopping before a young man still trembling, holding his spear. "Did you see?" he asked, looking into his eyes. "It wasn't us, it was the Lord. If he overthrows kings, who can stand against us?" The young man took a deep breath. "No one, but we must remain holy as we learned at Ai." Caleb smiled slightly. The lesson was sinking in. That night campfires glowed with roaring flames. Songs were not of vain triumph, but of gratitude. Men raised voices, women clapped, children repeated refrains as if etched in stone. The starry sky seemed to respond, a silent witness. Joshua stood erect as a general, observing everything with weary but steady eyes. The battle was a conquest, but also a lesson. Each king toppled, each standard burned, each stone rolled away was more than a symbol, a catechesis of a people who learned to obey. Caleb stepped back, looking at the horizon. In distance, mountains rose like walls. He knew the fight wasn't over. There were still lands to conquer, giants to face, hills to subdue. His heart burned, but his body felt the weight of years. Still, there was no retreat, no hint of giving up. As bonfire flames consumed the last ashes of enemy standards, Caleb murmured to himself as if sealing a pact. "It's not over yet. The promise remains." And deep in his heart, a thought burned like embers under ashes, but there was still a mountain of giants left. Campfire flames still licked crackling enemy standards when rumor spread through camp. The division of the land had begun. Amid suppressed laughter, leather maps and stakes driven into ground, new names were created for ancient valleys. Yet beside each victory chant, someone murmured the same reminder like a wind scar in the ear. There was still a mountain of giants. Caleb straightened his torso, took a deep breath, and walked to Joshua's tent. His shadow, lengthened by dusk, looked like a young man. but gray hair betrayed time the desert embroidered on his forehead. The courtyard before the tent was crowded. Tribal chiefs awaited their turn. Warriors discussed exploits. Boys imitated battle stances with twigs. When they saw him, they instinctively made way. There was something unyielding about him, something of rock-like firmness that learned to drink water at Horeb. Joshua looked up and smiled discreetly, as if reunited with a traveling companion. "Brother," the general said, standing, "your presence is a living reminder of the path the Lord has taken us on." Caleb nodded, hand on chest. "You know, Joshua, what the Lord said to Moses about me and you at Kadesh Barnea." His voice was clear, without tremor, filling the courtyard. "I was 40 years old when Moses, the Lord's servant, sent me to spy out the land, and I brought back the report as it was in my heart. The brothers who went up with me made the people's hearts melt, but I followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly." A reverent murmur ran through. Young men leaned forward as if committing each syllable to memory. Caleb continued, "The Lord has kept me alive as he promised these 45 years. While Israel wandered in the wilderness, I walked with them. Today I am 85 years old." He straightened his shoulders, ancient muscles creasing linen. "I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me, both for war and for going out and coming in." The words echoed through the courtyard like invisible trumpets. An old man raised his voice vigorously, a body scarred by sand, but alight with a youth that couldn't be contained in saddlebags of age. Joshua smiled with his eyes. Young men of Judah stirred. "Show us, Father, if this strength is memory or present." Caleb drew his sword. He didn't raise it with fury, but with the calm of one who knows. He twisted the hilt, making the blade sing through air, a perfect arc gleaming in last sunlight. Then he stuck it in ground next to the map, as if signing a pact. "Strength is not measured in polished steel," he said with a sweetness that struck like a lesson. "It is measured in loyalty kept when no one sees." The assembly quieted. It was time for vindication. Caleb turned to Joshua, face bathed in warm light. "Now therefore, give me this mountain of which the Lord spoke that day. For you heard then that the Anakim were there, and that the cities were great and fortified. If the Lord is with me, I will drive them out, as the Lord said." Air seemed to catch its breath. The mountain he spoke of rose southwest, ancient stones, deep valleys, shadows of giants planted like oaks. Hebron, a name holding promises, oaths, patriarchs' tombs, Abraham's footsteps beside Mamre, the land where God was laughed at and where God returned laughter to believers. Joshua let silence catechize the moment, then placed his hand on his friend's shoulder. "Caleb, son of Jephunneh, you are the testimony God wrote on Israel's flesh. The land your feet have trodden will be your inheritance and your children's forever, because you have followed the Lord wholeheartedly. Go, take what has been promised you." A muffled cry rose from Judah's ranks. Some young men raised spears, others struck ground in rhythm, but Caleb signaled them to cease. His eyes, far away, were already climbing what no one wanted to climb. A group of young men approached, eager to go with him. "We want to go, my lord. They say the Anakim are like towers. We want to test faith's weight alongside your sword." "Faith is not tested by boasting," Caleb replied, measuring them as a blacksmith measures iron. "It is tested by constancy. If you come not to see an old man win, but to learn that strength lies not in the arm, but in the whole heart." That night camp chatted quietly. Around coals, stories were told of Kadesh, the 12 spies' report, stones in Amorite valleys, walls crumbling before trumpets, the sun obeying like a lamb. Living memory of faithfulness passed from mouth to mouth, spun like a seamless tunic. In each tale, Caleb's figure grew, not as a muscular hero, but as a man whose yes aged without wrinkling. "How did you keep your spirit up?" a young man asked before dawn gathered voices. "By remembering the giver more than the gift," he replied. "When the heart clings to the voice that promised, age only adds burden. The body can tire, but hope, if fed in the right place, rejuvenates. Every day I begin anew, even while burying friends. That's how you reach far, one yes a day." In the morning they set out. The road to Hebron wound between hillsides and fig trees, ancient wells and fields where wind carved waves in barley. Every now and then standing stones appeared as memorials. Caleb touched one or another as if greeting old companions. "Here the Lord spoke to Abraham," he murmured. "Here the promise took root." When they saw the first shadows of the Anakim, the young men's hearts beat faster. They were broad-shouldered men with necklaces of teeth, swords barely grasped. From towers they mocked as Jericho once mocked. "What's this?" one thundered. "They sent us a grandfather." Caleb didn't answer. He climbed down from his mount, dug heels into ground, and raised his voice. It wasn't a shout. It was a declaration that seemed to pull the very ground toward the promise. "The Lord whose word sustained me when all were falling is with me. Your walls are not higher than his decree." The first clashes tested everyone's pulse. Caleb advanced with a lean step, striking with precision, shielding the boys, correcting their guard, restoring their strength with short phrases. "Shoulder in, shield high. Don't chase the echo, chase the target." Divine vitality burned within him, not fury but focus. Each advance tore out ancient roots of fear. Each retreat repaired formation. Each charge opened a path in a city accustomed to seeing men retreat. At noon, they paused in a rock's shade. A young man breathed shallowly. "Your strength is iron, my lord." "My strength is on loan," Caleb replied, offering him water. "He who loves the giver is never without resources." When they returned, rumors changed direction. The Anakim, accustomed to winning by size, discovered too late that faith's eternal youth is not measured in elbows, but in columns of trust. From house to house, courtyard to courtyard, step by step, Hebron began to unlearn pride's hymn. Judah's children learned a new song with the rhythm of obedient steps and the rhymes of faithful promises. As dusk fell, horizon turned gold on hills. Caleb climbed to the highest terrace, raised his sword, and held it suspended a long moment until sun kissed it. The city fell silent. There was no speech, just a whole man erect, breathing a promise fulfilled and yet to be fulfilled. Down below, Joshua appeared as a dot accompanied by leaders. Right there, he would bless the inauguration. A boy approached, eyes filled with tears. "Father Caleb, what do you say now that your feet tread the ground your eyes coveted so long?" "I say this," he replied, lowering his sword slowly as if keeping a prayer in its metal. "The promise does not grow old. Whoever marries God's faithfulness wakes up young every day." Night fell with broad stars, camp-lit lamps like constellations at men's height. Children ran between courtyards, women sang an ancient melody, old men smiled with small yet full smiles. In the fold of silence before moon rose, Caleb turned again to Joshua, who had now reached him, and whispered, "The Lord has fulfilled his purpose thus far, my friend. The rest will be the same with him at the forefront." Hands clasped. The young men of Judah gathered in a circle, raised the missing Amen, and wind carried the word to Mamre's trees, which repeated it softly in their leaves. Caleb's body begged for rest, but his soul, awake, pointed ahead. There were still pockets of resistance, shadows of fortresses, voices of threat. Hebron was the key, not the lock. He looked again at the mountain's dark ridge, took a deep breath, and with the serenity of one who no longer needs to prove anything, concluded as if opening the next page with a fingertip. "Give me this mountain, for giants live there." The silence preceding battle was not of peace, but of tension. Judah's camp awakened early, but no one sang. Young warriors sharpened blades on stones, metallic sound cutting air like an omen. Others adjusted shields, but many gazes wavered. Ahead, the valley stretched wide like an open mouth. In hills, shadows moved colossal silhouettes, the Anakim. Warriors of immense stature, shoulders like walls, voices echoing like thunder. Caleb watched silently. He didn't need anyone to tell him what was before them. Men trembled. Some bit lips, others closed eyes. All carried the same fear in their fists. The youth who marched confidently into Jericho now hesitated at sight of flesh and blood giants. One of Judah's young men approached, voice low as a whisper. "Father Caleb, what if we There are so many, they're so huge, each is worth 10. Caleb remained silent a moment, simply taking a deep breath, staring at horizon. His memory brought back the day 45 years earlier when he spied Canaan and saw the same Anakim. Back then, most fled, calling them stone gods. Only he and Joshua held their gaze. Now years turned his hair gray, but not his faith. "It is not against them we fight," he replied firmly. "It is against the fear living within us. If we overcome fear, the giants will fall like any man." Even so, internal conflict throbbed in his chest. Age's weight told him his body was no longer the same, but the promise's voice burned, reminding him this mountain was his by right given by the Lord. He would not be given to cowardice. The Anakim appeared on the field, advancing with enormous shields, spears like olive trunks. Ground shook under their footsteps. Their roar filled the valley like thunder. Birds flapped wings. Wild animals ran in fright. It was the emotional trigger, giants roaring, displaying a force seeking to crush not just bodies but souls. The men of Judah retreated half a step. Caleb felt it, the edge of defeat stretching near. Then he advanced, raised his sword to sky, and shouted in a voice echoing off hills, "The Lord is with us. He promised us this land, and today we will see his faithfulness again. Do not fear, children of Judah. Those who trust will not back down." The words fell upon warriors like sparks on dry straw. Trumpets echoed, at first tremulous, then firmer. Men banged shields, shouted, caught their breath. Fear was still there, but now mixed with flame. Caleb descended the slope ahead of them all. His sword gleamed, body held high like a faith's banner. The giants advanced, each step sounded like thunder. Caleb's heart raced, but his inner voice repeated like a hammer, "The Lord is with me. The Lord is with me." One Anakim, taller than all, roared, seeing him approach. "You foolish old man," he shouted, brandishing his spear. "Your frail body will be food for birds." Caleb responded not with insult, but with action. He clenched his fist, raised his sword with surprising vigor for 85 years, and advanced. Inspired Judah's boys followed like a swarm. Dust rose from ground, mingling with trumpets' sound, war cries, colossuses' roar. Spears clashed against shields, iron against stones, valley filled with thunder. Caleb cut with precision, dodging blows that could have crushed him. Each charge cleared a path for young men behind. It was as if divine vitality sustaining 45 years of waiting renewed him just for this moment. Giants laughed at first, but soon laughter turned to rage. They saw the old man wouldn't yield. Blows didn't crush him. Faith didn't waver. As they roared, Judah's men shouted louder, spurred by Caleb's example. Sun was high, burning through dust suspended in air, illuminating swords and spears like lightning. The field became a cauldron of voices, blood, dust, clashing hope and fear. And in the center of it all, Caleb standing tall, sword raised, advancing as if 20 again. Hills echoed, heavens watched, promise fulfilled with every step taken against Colossi. With sword raised, he advances against Colossi. The blow splitting the Colossus's line wasn't the strongest, it was the most accurate. Caleb's blade sliced air like an obedient memory, grazing the first Anakim's shield rim and scratching his bicep, forcing him to retreat 2 steps. The giant roared. Valley responded with a chorus of mingled voices. Steel, dust, breath. The young men of Judah closed the semicircle. Formation advanced a body. At slope's edge, some women watched with hearts in throats. Boys, courage still fresh, clenched fists with each crack of iron. "Shoulder in," Caleb shouted without missing a beat. Shield high, eyes on target. The second Anakim came like a chariot without brakes, an olive trunk for a spear. Caleb turned his hip, let the barb whiz past. And with heel wedged ground returned force in a short sword arc touching the Colossus's hamstring. The giant fell to his knees, spitting curses, never knowing defeat. Around him, warriors hesitated for a breath, the silent observation preceding astonishment. The old man, alone at the front, had overcome what youth thought impossible. "They bleed," whispered a young man, eyes alight. "Then they fall," replied another, voice rising. "If they bleed, they fall." 3 Anakim brothers, named cities whispered like thunder. Sheshai, Ahim, and Talm closed the siege. Caleb felt for a moment Age's weight biting his lower back. Internal conflict tried to raise its head. Time against promise, sand against blood, weariness against focus. He took a deep breath as in desert when there was only manna and water from rock, and answered inwardly, "The Lord is with me." "Come, you towers of flesh," he said, raising his sword not as vain challenge but as a prayer opening the way. Today, the Lord closes an old chapter. Ahim dove first, striking downward. Caleb took a half step left and heard ground crack where enemy's blade struck. He swung his fist, biting into forearm with steel, and the giant's weapon flew. Sheshai, furious, tried to grab him as if uprooting a bush. Caleb ducked under massive arms and with a hip snap drove the tip between rib and chest. The roar turned into a gurgle. Talmai the largest came last, laughing with enormous teeth bared. "You will laugh on the ground," said Caleb, and he went to meet him. The impact sent dust swirling. Talmai's spear swept air. Caleb dropped to his knees to escape, torso supple as a hunter's bow. The Colossus tried to crush him with the shaft, but the elder caught the wood in his elbow's crook, twisted with his weight, and cleared a half-step advance. It was enough. The blade swept diagonally from hip to shoulder, cutting through hide and pride. Talmai staggered, eyes frozen in amazement as if the mountain itself shrank within him. "Now," Caleb shouted. Judah responded with a tidal push. The young men trained in short orders, rhythm entered the breaches, shields creaking, knees firm, blades like syllables. The Colossi, who started laughing, were already sweating fear. Amid the din, the whisper became a cry. The eldest defeated the greatest. "You see, son," said an elderly man panting beside his grandson, "the youth of faith has no wrinkles." "I want to grow old like this," the boy replied, tears mixing with dust. The battle now sang in Change's tone. Ahim fell first, head striking stone with a cracked bell's sound. Sheshai fell face down, fingers digging into earth that wouldn't save him. That left Talmai, what he called a shadow of stone and laughter of thunder. He wanted to flee to Hebron's terraces, but his feet weighed like ancient guilt. Caleb reached him on the ramp and spoke without shouting, voice clear as a sharp blade. "This mountain is a promise, not a trophy. Come down from your throne, giant." Talmai spun a blind blow of desperation. Caleb entered the guard, the old desert lesson in his sinews. Short step, clear pulse, whole heart. The sword found the point between collarbone and neck, and the last great Anakim's body trembled. For a second, everything fell silent. Wind, birds, boys on hillside, old men with trembling hands, young men with heaving chests. Then the giant fell. The emotional trigger went off like a clarion in the people's chests, the last giant falling. Judah's warriors stopped, eyes wide. Some let out the scream held since Jericho, others fell to knees, others embraced those nearby. Caleb, sweaty, dusty, enemy's blood spattering linen, planted feet on the stone step and raised his sword to sun. It wasn't arrogance, it was surrender to the God who honors the faithful. "To the Lord belongs the victory," he cried. "To him is the strength, to him is the inheritance." From the mountain's foot, Joshua approached with tribal leaders. His gaze met Caleb's, and both smiled with the gratitude of those who have seen God do the impossible. More than once. Joshua raised his hand, voice coming like a decree. "Today, the Lord's word has been fulfilled before all Israel. Because you have followed the Lord your God wholeheartedly, Hebron will be your inheritance and your descendants forever." An amen rolled downhill like a good avalanche. Hebron's gates were thrown open, courtyards once filled with mockery now welcomed songs. Strange altars were toppled, stones of Dagon fell, ancient dust rose in columns, the city breathed new air. Kiriath Arba, the city of the greatest Anakim, forgot pride's name and returned to being called Hebron, a place of alliances and embraces. "Flag," shouted a captain. "Bring the flag." From ranks middle, 2 young men ran carrying Judah's standard, deep red cloth, a lion embroidered in gold, an ancient wood staff. They climbed the wall's steps with light feet, hearts beating in time with a psalm. When they reached the top, they thrust the spear and let fabric open to wind. The visual peak etched in everyone's eyes. Judah's banner above walls, cloth dancing as if hills themselves sang, "The Lord is faithful." Caleb descended slowly, knees reminding him of his years, but his glowing face seemed that of a young man. Children ran to meet him, women extended hands, old men bowed heads. He stopped in the main square and touched the central stone with his palm, rugged, ancient, keeper of stories. "This house belongs to the God of Abraham," he said softly so the whole city could hear. "Here a promise was sworn. Here a promise is fulfilled." Joshua approached, and right there before leaders and people laid his hands on him in a simple, unostentatious yet weighty gesture. "Justice is when God gives the faithful what he promised," he stated, "and mercy is when he allows us to learn from those who kept faith to the end." "It wasn't me, my friend," Caleb replied, eyes moist. "I was supported all these years. Supported." In the afternoon, altars of gratitude were erected instead of statues, memorials of 12 stones instead of songs to false gods, psalms that knew the way to the tent. Judah's families began marking out fields, digging wells, measuring courtyards. There was no voracious haste, there was care. Hebron became an inheritance, not just land, but a catechism for children. When they ask you why this wall has a banner and this square an altar, you shall say, "Because an old man believed as a child, and God honored him." As sun set, Caleb climbed alone to a tall house's roof. From there he could see battle lines fading into darkness, fires blazing in courtyard, women chanting a simple powerful line, boys repeating with tired bodies the blows they learned. Wind carried the smell of bread and wet earth. Someone was washing with fresh water the blade that scratched pride that morning. "Lord," he murmured, fingers touching warm stone, "you have kept me alive this far. Do not let my heart become master of what is yours. Make me the gatekeeper of this inheritance. Enter and reign." A young man approached shyly, holding Judah's smaller standard. "Father Caleb, can we put him in this house until yours is built?" "You can," he smiled. "Here where everyone can see and remember that strength belongs to the Lord." When night had fallen, Joshua gathered leaders at the wall's foot. He spoke little, as befits one who has already said the essentials with actions. The war continues, but today we learned once again the essence of it all. God honors the faithful. From above, Caleb nodded silently. He felt in his bones the peace coming not from rest, but from fulfillment. The twist was written on his very body. The eldest had brought down the greatest. Justice was kindled. God honored a whole heart. The reward planted. Hebron, an eternal inheritance. On rooftops, women guarded children. In courtyards, men extinguished fires with sand. In streets, dust settled. Judah's standard flying high slowly traced the word Amen in darkness. Before descending, Caleb cast his gaze beyond hills where Abraham's stars stood lit, promises for each generation to come. "Boys," he said, crossing courtyard to a waiting group, "remember what matters, not muscles, not fame. What matters is a whole heart. Guard it, and God will do with you what he did with us today." The boy's eyes lit up. One with the courage of one who asks questions to learn ventured. "And after Hebron, Father Caleb," he smiled, face hollow with years and full of dawn. "After Hebron, it's the same old story, faithfulness day after day. God signs the rest." Outside, wind turned the night's page and played with the flag high on the wall. Silence replaced trumpets. The city breathed a new future, not made of bronze and shouts, but of obedience and memory. And in that pause between last spark and first dream, the story's narrator, time itself, obedient to the author, took the echo of footsteps far away. Kept in his chest the sound of the last giant falling, and with the voice of one announcing dawn, wrote in the space no one sees but every heart hears. And the name of Caleb would echo through generations. Wind blew gently over Hebron's hills. The scent of vineyards mingled with ripe olive trees' aroma. The city that once roared with giant's voice now rested in peace, enveloped by soft songs and children's laughter. On a simple terrace, seated on a carved wooden bench, sat Caleb. His hair, once black then gray, was now white as sheep's wool grazing valleys. His hands, which so often held his sword, rested on his staff, but his eyes still shone as brightly as the day he first saw the promised land. He looked at Hebron. Every stone spoke of battles, every field reminded him of prayers, every street echoed with footsteps of a people who learned to obey. He was old but not weary, aged but not defeated. The peace reigning over the city was his greatest victory, more than any fallen colossus, any raised flag. A boy, his blood grandson, approached slowly. "Grandfather, is it true the Lord gave you this city because you never gave up?" Caleb smiled, stroking her head. "It wasn't my strength that brought Hebron, my son. It was the Lord's faithfulness. Time may wrinkle skin, but it doesn't erase the promise. Remember, those who keep their hearts completely for God receive in the end what seemed impossible in the beginning." The boy settled beside him, eyes fixed on the same landscape. "But the giants, weren't you afraid of them?" "Of course," Caleb replied, chuckling softly. "But courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to obey even when trembling. The secret is to remember He who promised is greater than anything standing against us." Sun was setting, scattering gold across Hebron's walls. Women brought water jars, men gathered tools, families gathered around fires. The city breathed peacefully like a sealed inheritance. Caleb lifted his face, feeling Sun's warmth touch his skin. His eyes welled up, not with sadness but with fulfillment. "Lord," he murmured, looking up at sky, "you have kept me until now. You gave me the mountain you promised, and you let my eyes see this peace. Your word did not fail, and I was only able to remain standing because you sustained me." He took a deep breath, and for a moment let his mind wander beyond years, beyond Hebron's walls, beyond fallen colossuses. He thought of future generations, struggles yet to come, giants with different names but no less fearsome. He smiled because he knew victory's secret lay not in brawn, but in perseverance. "Today you too will face giants," he said, as if speaking not only to his grandson, but to all who would one day hear his story. "Some won't be shaped like warriors, but like doubts, injustices, pains weighing more than swords. Do not forget, the same God who gave me Hebron will give you victory if you keep faith until the end." The boy attentive held his hand. "So if I believe, I can also achieve a lot." "Yes, you can," Caleb replied, smiling. "Every generation has its mountains. Your faith can conquer mountains too." Silence enveloped the terrace. Sun, as it set, covered Hebron with a golden mantle, illuminating walls, fields, vineyards. It was as if sky itself signed the final scene in the life of a man who dared to believe when everyone else retreated. And in the last frame time recorded, there was Caleb, old but full of eternal vigor, looking at his city in peace, crowned not by gold but by perseverance. Your faith can also conquer mountains. If this story spoke to your heart, 2 other videos will appear on your screen with biblical characters who also lived promises and miracles. Click subscribe to the channel and leave your like. May the same God who strengthened Caleb in his old age and led him to conquer Hebron also strengthen your faith, because sometimes the greatest victory comes after the long wait.